certain answer. I think if we did walk into the film of your life and we could call it within the first 5 minutes, we wouldn't stick around for the rest of it. But if we had a sense that there were going to be some plot twists along the way, I think we actually find those plot twists to be deeply satisfying.
Your life can be larger than this, and don't limit yourself to what you think traditional roles are. Dream the dream that's for you. It's not for anybody else, it's for you.
When we are in the presence of God, it's not a generic voice saying, "Oh, human one." This voice knows us by name. What makes wine magical, in your opinion?
That I cannot tell you, and therefore is magic.
Hi, welcome to Darkwood Brew, a convergence point on and offline where spiritual seekers and people of faith gather to find community and encouragement, inspiration, and challenge for their journey through life's dark wood. During this series, we're exploring the concept of vocatio. We're finding the work of your soul in the soul of your work. One of the great misconceptions about finding your calling in life, or vocatio, is that it's one particular thing we do over the course of our lives. Some would define their identity professionally as a doctor, for instance, or a social worker. Others might define it more relationally as a mother or a grandmother or as a member of a particular community. Yet vocatio doesn't have as much to do with a precise vocation or a relational identity as you may think. There certainly are, of course, people who work out their vocatio in these ways, yet vocatio is harder to pin down or define. It's more organically related to who you are than what you do. Now, this is both good news and bad news for those of us at any age who still don't know what we're going to do when we grow up. The good news is that living out your vocatio is not primarily about what we do. Ultimately, it's simply about being yourself, your true self, not your false self. But this is, of course, the bad news too. Finding a vocation that suits us is a lot easier than finding our true self. Will your true self please stand up? This evening we're going to be exploring the call to get lost, understanding that actually getting lost is part of the way we find that true self. And joining us tonight, well, I have to clear up something. The rumors are true. I'm sleeping with our Skype guest this evening, who is not Clayton Chapman, as we had planned, who's been rescheduled, but my wife, Melanie Elnes. But before getting to Melanie, Lost, and Vocatio, let's invite the band to take us into the episode. Our scripture passage is one that we are hearing elsewhere in this series as well, but we're returning to it in a little different way. We're looking at, listening to Exodus 3, verses 1 through 14, and the call of Moses, and when Moses asks God for God's name. Let's invite Tracy to for our first pass-through of our Pneuma reading for the evening.
Moses was keeping the flock of his father-in-law Jethro, the priest of Midian. He led his flock beyond the wilderness and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. There the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire out of a bush. He looked, and the bush was blazing, yet it was not consumed. Then Moses said, "I must turn aside and look at this great sight and see why the bush is not burned up." When the Lord saw that he had turned aside to see, God called to him out of the bush, "Moses, Moses." And he said, "Here I am." Then he said, "Come no closer. Remove the sandals from your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground." He said further, "I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob." And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. Then the Lord said, "I have observed the misery of my people who are in Egypt. I have heard their cry on account of their taskmasters. Indeed, I know their suffering. And I have come down to deliver them from the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of the land, to a good and broad land, a land flowing with milk and honey, to the country of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hivites, and the Jebusites. The cry of the Israelites has now come to me, and I have also seen how the Egyptians oppress them. So come, I will send you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt." But Moses said to God, "Who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and bring the Israelites out of Egypt?" He said, "I will be with you, and this shall be the sign for you that it is I who sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall worship God on this mountain." But Moses said to God, "If I come to the Israelites and say to them, 'The God of your ancestors has sent me to you,' and they ask me, 'What is his name?' what shall I say to them?" God said to Moses, "I am who I am." He said further, "Thus you shall say to the Israelites, 'I am has sent me to you.'"
So before turning to Melanie, we just want to provide a little context to that passage you just heard, which will also come up in the second half of our program for meditation. But so Moses notices this bush burning as he's out in the wilderness, and he notices that that bush is burning, but it's not being consumed in any way. So he pulls aside, and that's where God speaks to him out of this burning bush. But then God calls him to do this incredibly difficult thing, to demand that Pharaoh let his people go. And Moses asks God, "Well, in case they ask who's calling me to do this, what's your name?" And then God answers Moses out of that burning bush in Hebrew, "Ehyeh asher ehyeh." I am who I am. Now, I don't know about you, but I kind of wonder about all the Hebrew swear words that were going through Moses' head that in response to that vague, what? I am who I am? Is that a response? Really? It doesn't really help when we notice too that Ehyeh asher ehyeh can be translated not simply as I am who I am, but I am what I am, or I will be who I will be. So is God just like trying to be intentionally vague to Moses? Or could it be that, well, that God is actually being as concrete and specific as God can get to a question that Moses doesn't entirely understand? You know, in the ancient world, names had deeper significance than they tend to have these days. Perhaps you've looked up on the internet one day the etymology of your name. Oh, it means such and such. Well, back in the ancient world, those meanings were very much alive and well, and actually oftentimes a name really was a signifier of someone's identity in life, not simply as identity as a name, but what their calling or vocatio was. So you take somebody like Moses himself. You may recall the story of Moses' naming, what came after he was drawn out of the Nile River by Pharaoh's daughter, who then, after drawing him out, rescuing him from the Nile, said, "I'll name him Moses because I drew him out of the water." And we think, what? You know, what do you mean Moses and I drew him out? What's the relationship? Well, Moses, or Moshe in Hebrew, sounds a lot like the very Hebrew word for the verb drawn out. So there's a word play going on there, and it's a response to this deep intuition on her part that that action of being rescued from the Nile, being drawn out, will somehow come into play. It was a sign of something deeper about this individual she'd found in the river, that the drawing out will be of significance in Moses' life. And of course, little could she have known just how deep a significance it had. This Moses, this child, would eventually draw out his own people from slavery in Egypt and draw them out of even the angry waters of the Red Sea to rescue them so they could live as the people of God. So when Moses asks God, "What is your name?" he's not simply asking for a list of consonants and vowels strung together to call God. He's really asking God, "Who are you? What's your identity? What are you about? What's your significance? Who are you?" Well, God doesn't exactly answer Moses in the most direct way. And I think there's a reason for that. In the 6th century, actually, there was a Christian mystic named Dionysius the Areopagite. Actually, he was a monk who wrote under that pseudonym, but the pseudonym coming from the Bible. But he wrote a book called The Cloud of Knowing, which is one of those great books that really talk about the spiritual path almost with surgical precision to it. And in the 6th century, Dionysius the Areopagite, or the monk writing in his name, wrote the following words. He said, if you could put that up on the screen, "God can certainly be loved, but not thought. God can be taken and held by love, but not by thought." When God answered Moses, "I am who I am," is as if God wasn't going to answer Moses with words. You can't know God with words. You can have libraries stacked with books about God, and you still can't know God anywhere near the extent to which you can know God through falling in love with God. And of course, falling in love just introduces us deeper into the mystery of God, and it also into a deeper form of knowing God. Now, instead of telling Moses who God is, God shows Moses where God is. And this is part of God's answer, I think. God shows up in the burning bush. Now, that's not just simply a notation of some wild mystical trick that God played to get Moses' attention. That symbol of the burning bush really taps deeply into the mythological imagination of the ancients. It's symbolic. It really describes actually where we find God in our day. If you look at the symbol of fire in the Bible, it really comes up over and over again as a sign of fire, of fiery passion and love. Where love and passion come together, you get fire. And the fact that the bush isn't burned up is a signal that, where do we find God? It's where we find love and passion coming together, burning brightly, but not consuming the bearer of that fiery love. Perhaps you've had an experience of this fiery love yourself. Maybe not revealing your entire next path, but maybe simply revealing a next step or two. Times where you sense just such an aliveness, such a call to engage in a certain way of being in the world, or engage in a certain task or a particular job or relationship that is so connected to you on a soul level that you seemingly have infinite energy to carry out that task or to be engaged in that relationship, that the energy just keeps coming without burning you out, without making you tired and exhausted, other than kind of normal wear and tear. Those times, if the Bible is right, are times when you are overhearing the call of God to your own life. Again, maybe not revealing like your whole next, the rest of what your life is going to be about, but at least your next steps. It's important to pay attention to those times. And of course, when we do pay attention, they last, and some of those do last a lifetime. But some of those fire, the sense of fiery presence in our life, sometimes that they tend to wane. They tend to actually, what used to work, what used to bring us joy and happiness, no longer is bringing us so much joy and happiness. That fire begins to dim. It begins to consume us. It begins to perhaps even exhaust us. We find ourselves off our path. We find ourselves lost. Well, if you happen to be feeling lost right now, there's no reason to lose hope. We tend to be off of our path or feeling lost. Really, sometimes it is our fault. We've strayed from the path. Maybe we've failed to pay attention. Or maybe something about what lit us up spooked us as well. We thought it felt like a compliment we didn't deserve, or it was going to involve too many life adjustments. And so we shy away and we find ourselves off our path and then getting more and more exhausted, wondering, why do I feel so lost? But other times we could be feeling that sense of lostness, not because we have strayed from our path, but because the Spirit is doing something in us, trying to slow us down, trying to get us to notice our surroundings. If we were still full of fiery passion, we might just be heading straight ahead in our direction, when really the Spirit's wanting to make us, influence us to make a right turn or a left turn that we'd miss entirely if we were all stoked up, instead of feeling lost, where we need to do what David Wagner suggests in his poem Lost. Stand still. The trees around you are not lost. Notice your surroundings. Pay attention. Listen deeply. Let the forest find you. Sometimes we need to get lost in order to let that path find us. Well, this evening, as I mentioned, we're talking with Melanie Elnes, who I've known for the past 27 years. And really, I'm just getting to know every day, I think. And one of the things I learned about her is that, just this morning, is that she's willing to come on as a guest at the last minute, despite the fact that she's not necessarily as comfortable on camera as some folks. But Melanie, thank you, number one.
You're welcome. It's nice to be here.
And now you currently, are employed in a vocation that you associate with your sense of call or sweet spot, your joy. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Okay, so I work as an RN at the medical center here in Omaha. And there's really nothing I don't like about my job. I like that it's science-based and there's something new to learn every day. I like that it's team-based, and so helping others doesn't just mean helping patients, it means helping one another and helping the doctors and the rest of the staff on a daily basis. I like the environment. You and the girls will appreciate that I like that it's clean and that there are labels on every cupboard.
No comments, no comment.
So it does definitely feel like it's my sweet spot.
Yeah. But now that's not a career or profession you've been in for your whole life.
Not at all.
Life
no.
path. You actually, when I got to know you, you were working as a quality assurance manager on the herring grounds of the Bering Sea up in Alaska. Yeah.
So when I went to college, I knew that my interest was in science, and at that time I found myself feeling like I needed to determine while I was in college what I wanted to do as a career. And really nursing was the only thing that came to mind, but I was too timid to take organic chemistry. So I did get a degree in life sciences, marine biology emphasis, and when I graduated then, I didn't really have a sense of direction, but I felt a very strong response to an urge for wanderlust, and over the course of the next several years, had probably no fewer than a dozen different seasonal jobs and adventures that I just would follow, you know, kind of almost without too much thought process going into it.
You might have been maybe, I mean, in a sense, I mean, not, your parents loved you dearly, but in a sense, you might have been every parent's worst nightmare for a kid who gets out of college and then going around doing this and this and this and this. Like, what were some of those things that you found yourself into?
Well, fortunately, none of them were going back to live with my parents. So.
Yeah, that's right. That's unusual these days.
But okay, so for example, and I'll give you a little bit of the depth of thought process that went into them. So, you know, at some point I was feeling like, okay, I don't know what I'm going to do. I don't know where I'm going to live. Well, maybe I should decide where I'm going to live, and that will help me determine what I'm going to do. So I know I like snow, and I like Western music and swing dancing, so maybe I should move to Wenatchee, Washington. And fortunately, I just spent a long weekend there, and there was no burning bush, so I did not move to Wenatchee, Washington. But then there was a time that I met a woman in a laundromat who told me about her work as a foreign fisheries observer for the National Marine Fisheries Service, and I thought, that sounds really interesting. So I spent 2 months working on a Korean ship as a foreign fisheries observer, and I did, during that experience, grow to really appreciate and love the Korean language. It just had a very poetic tone to it. So what?
Oh, I'm just laughing because I know you grew also to love Korean food.
Yes, I did.
There's a story about being on one of these great big fishing boats.
Oh, don't tell the whole story. Oh. That'll take too long. It'll take too long.
You'll just have to wonder. Find it on Facebook.
No, but I went back to Seattle then and spent a couple of semesters learning Korean, and then fell into this thought process of, okay, so maybe I should start a seafood export company and export seafood to Korea. So a friend and I...
Or from Korea, right?
No, to Korea.
Oh, okay.
Printed up business cards and went to Korea for 5 weeks and did a whole lot of shopping and not a lot of company building.
And you wound up like being interrogated, right?
At one point, yeah, again, you're just
oh, come on, I know what time we have. This is fun.
All right, so we had gone to Busan and saw a sign about like a government fisheries office, and we thought, oh, maybe we should go see what that's about. And we had gone into a bank then to ask them where that particular office was, and the next thing we knew, several people in suits had come into the bank, and they took us to separate rooms in the back and interrogated us individually, you know, asking what we were doing there, why did we want to find this office, and it was a little intimidating to say the least. And then eventually, I guess our stories matched well enough that they let us go, but yeah.
Again, every parent's worst nightmare.
Right. I'm not sure I told my parents that story before. So anyway, and then one adventure was that, you know, again, appealing to my sense of wanderlust, was to go to Alaska, and that was where I became first a quality assurance technician and then a quality assurance manager, and that was a really great confluence of my interest in marine life and just the detail-oriented nature of that particular job. And, you know, it felt really perfect while I was in my 20s because, you know, eventually the long, horrendous hours in that production manufacturing environment, it did make me question, okay, well now what's, what will be next? And right around that time, found the next flame, and he's still pretty hot. And so we married and then moved to Princeton, where Eric pursued his PhD studies. And I will say that, following what used to be my flame became a little trickier when it was a flame for both of us. And I think that there is room for compromise while following your path. And so during that time, I continued working, but I would say that the jobs that I did, while they did feed my soul on some level, at that time, I think that my true flame became growing a family.
Yeah. Well, I remember being just so grateful that you were the kind of person who would be open for kind of life outside the box when I first even broached the subject when we were dating, that, oh, by the way, I'm actually thinking about going to seminary and being a minister. Mm-hmm. Are you cool with that? Mm-hmm. Which was a little bit outside of your sphere of comfort. Absolutely,
yeah. Mm-hmm. That was only the first of many adventures that Eric led me on.
Go ahead. Well, this is your time now. You're right on broadcast the world. Such as?
I'll let you identify your own path.
Yeah. No, there would be many a times in my own path I'd be very grateful for being in relationship with someone who didn't just simply discount something because it was a bit outside the box, just who had that experience of, I'm going to go to Korea and work on, or I'm going to and try to form a company, or I'm going to be a foreign fisheries observer and jump out of, little rafts onto boats in the high seas, as everything's tossing and turning, and I'm going to go up to Alaska and so forth, so that, when in my own path, I would sense that fiery flame and say, well, hey, what if, I've just come back from sabbatical, but I've really sense a call to go on this walk across the country. Things like this that you face with fear and trembling yourself, but then to imagine the impact on the life of another person, as well. It's like, 99.9% of people would have had to written those ideas off, because you are in a relationship, and if there is not somebody with that sensibility, then it just doesn't happen. And I remember actually just a couple of years ago meeting with a group of ministers who we were kind of looking at some of these odd things in my path, like walks across the country and starting Darkwood Brew and all this, and they said, Eric, you're really somebody who just doesn't just talk about. We always talk about like stuff like this, but you actually do it. And my response was, yeah, I was kind of taught that from my wife.
Oh. Well, I think that it's interesting that the image that we're talking about is a burning bush, not just a burning stick, because I think that we all have maybe a lot of different embers within us that get, set you on a path, and you kind of reach the end of that path, and then another one ignites, and there's a lot more than just one path.
Right. There's not just one burning bush. It's kind of from bush to bush we go, and learn to follow that. And I think what I hear in your story, too, or your life story, really is this. You sense, not a lot of people say, oh, now she's following God's call to go to Wenatchee. No, that didn't work out. Oh, go to Korea. Oh, that didn't work out. Go to this. And yet, without, and you yourself were thinking, that's a misfire. Or this is a whatever.
Right.
And yet, and it's only now that you're into a career that really does turn you on, bring you alive, and yet that quality that kept being developed in your path of not just talking but go do it, even if it's outside the box, even if it involves risk, even if it involves hardship and challenge, that quality just continued to build in you, and to the point where then when you were in your last job before becoming a nurse, and which was in software quality assurance. So taking that forward when we moved to Arizona, and they exported the work of your unit to India. What did you do?
Right. So I had been in that job, that worked for that company for about 6 years, and so it was a very abrupt end, and I found myself feeling like okay, well, I don't want to work in software because this happens. So I knew that I wanted something that was not geography dependent and was a stable industry and involved quality assurance and process improvement. And I immediately found myself thinking once again about nursing.
The thing that had terrified you in college.
Exactly. And at that point, our children were a little older. I think they were 10 and 12. And, I knew that it was still going to be a lengthy process to become a nurse, and that we were going to have to work things out every step of the way. But I felt a commitment to that was really, really strong, probably because I knew that one ember had been a slow burn for a long time.
Yeah. So despite the fact that you were just unemployed and so income was down, despite the fact that was right about the time where I'm like, I think I need to be going, God's calling to walk across the country, despite the fact that we had 2 kids. You entered this thing that was so terrifying to you before, and yet after all this life experience of actually jumping out of boats and into Korea and so forth, you took that leap. You had the courage to take that and find that vocational piece. Yeah.
So I am reading with my study group a Richard Rohr book, and again, it's the Dionysus of Areopagus.
Dionysus the Areopagite?
The Areopagite,
the monk who wrote under his name anyway.
And one of the images that Richard Rohr mentions is that we go through a good part of our life feeling like we're holding onto a chain, trying to pull ourselves towards heaven, when in fact later in life we realize that it's, heaven's on the other end of the chain, lifting us to it.
That's a good analogy. It sounds like the way any of us kind of find our call in life. It's not us doing it, it's us responding to that which is coming out in us. Well, Melanie, we thank you for coming in at the last moment and sharing your own deeply personal story with us. And
you're welcome.
Let's go to dinner tonight afterwards, okay? Thanks.
Thank you.
Before moving on to our musical feature and starting the meditational part of Darkwood Brew, I want to once again thank Melanie Elnes for being here, and also invite you to a couple things that are happening this week that are streaming through the Darkwood Brew site. On Wednesday, we've been having a great crowd show up for Spirit Lab, which is really an hour focused on the art and discipline and craft of meditation and prayer. Have some teaching that I do about my own path on that level, and then we do actual experience of that using music from the Bob Ravenscroft's Inner Journeys trio. It's music that is being brought into meditation specifically for those who have a hard time meditating. It's music that you wouldn't normally associate with meditation, but again, it's for people who have a hard time with meditation to begin with. People are really finding a productive path there. So join me at 7 p.m. Central Time, 8 p.m. Eastern for Spirit Lab, should you care to do that, or you could also access the recorded episodes on the web. Then Thursday night, we have with us Annie Zonneveld, who is the head of the the Progressive Muslim Network in America, or the Muslims for Progressive Values. You know, many people, if you're not Muslim and you get most of your information about Islam from the news headlines, you have a very different impression of what is going on in Islam than what is actually going on in Islam, which is very similar to actually if you're not Christian and you get all your news about what Christianity is about from the national news. What is your impression of Christianity? You know, we know there's a lot more to the story than meets the national news and the headlines. So join us on Thursday night at 7 p.m. Central, 8 p.m. Eastern for the Center for Faith Studies presentation of Annie Zonneveld. It's going to be a very special evening. Annie has, we've spoken at the Wild Goose Festival. She's been a guest there and at many events around the United States. She'll be spectacular Thursday evening for really opening a window into Islam. Finally, just before we head out into music and meditation, I want to also thank you for your continuing donations. Those are very, very essential to keeping Darkwood Brew going on the internet to you and around the world. So if you can give just a small amount even every month, that's especially helpful to us as those bills come in. And thank you if you've been doing that already. So Matt, who do we have with us tonight?
Yeah, let me introduce the fellows quickly. Mr. Matt Amandus on the piano, Carlos Figueroa on the drums, and Rick A. Williams on the bass. The feature we're going to do is Battle Hymn of the Republic. Here comes Miss Carol Rogers to sing it for you.
Righteous sentence